When did sexy monster girls become the in thing? I mean, I'm not complaining, personally, but it seems like they're becoming more ubiquitous with anime and manga over the past couple of years. The new fad, if you would. You could argue that they've always been there in some form or another. I mentioned Rosario plus Vampire back in my Monster Musume review, though I did argue that it only tangentially counted since most of the monsters were very humanoid looking. But starting with Monster Musume, hot monster girls have basically become the in thing. We got anime like Jitsuwa Watashi wa, and manga like 12 Beast and Elf-san wa Yasararanai that lean on the appeal of hot monster girls, though whether the monsters were actually monstrous or just humanoid with minor monster features or superpowers varies from series to series. And somewhere in the monster girl shuffle, this little gem cropped up. Interviews with Monster Girls, based on a manga written by Peitos and brought to animated form by A1 Pictures. Tired of harems and action and stuff, but still like the idea of monsters intermingling with regular humans? Well, why not try some high school slice of life then? Interviews with Monster Girls takes place in a world where some sort of genetic mutation has slowly started to bring forth humans who have qualities of monsters. Yes, a genetic quirk somehow makes Dullahans, Yuki-onna, succubi, and vampires possible. I'm not sure which I find more fantastical, this or Hiroaka's explanation of quirks. And before anyone gets up in arms, that's not a slight against their quality, put the pitchforks down. Anyway, Interview's world is still at a point where these demi-humans, as they're referred to, are still finding their place in society, and accommodations haven't really been made for their unique needs. Not helped by the fact that research on the phenomenon has been pretty lax in the field for some reason. Enter Tetsuo, no not that one, a biology professor at a high school that has recently started taking in demi-human students and faculty. He's been fascinated by demi-humans for years and even wanted to write his college thesis on them, but was denied due to the sensitivity of the topic at the time. With the addition of a succubus to the school faculty and a friendship he forms with a small group of demi-students, he finally has a chance to learn more about them, while at the same time helping them work past some of the problems they're facing as both demis and regular teenagers. Like I said, fluffy slice of life. The big draw to the series is kind of the opposite of Monster Musume, in several different ways. Both series focus on delving into what makes a monster tick in terms of their anatomy, trying to figure out plausible explanations for how a monster like this would actually operate in the real world. Whereas Monster Musume goes out of its way to focus more on the animalistic parts of the monsters, Interviews treats it more like people who are just born differently, or have aspects about their bodies that set them apart from others. Some of these are more believable than others, of course. For example, the vampire's need to feed is downplayed and instead focuses more on their dislike of bright lights or high temperatures, with the addition that if they don't nibble on something now and then, they tend to get itchy teeth. Others, though, are less easy to swallow, even given the setting, such as the Dullahan, whose head is completely independent from the body and yet still eats like an ordinary person would. Or the succubus, who constantly generates an aphrodisiac through the skin and causes men to get horny just from skin-to-skin contact. These sorts of things are a little less believable, but the show does a valiant job of giving the demis plausibility to their existence, even when such an existence is completely impossible. The characters I find very likable, if a little bit limited. I should state for the record that this show is not a harem comedy. It does have elements of comedy in it, and it does make a dirty joke here and there, but for the most part, it goes out of its way to show that it's not trying to hook up a bunch of students with their teacher. Of the 5 main characters, Tetsuo is easily the blandest, but I've sort of grown to accept this with the lone male character in these shows. He does have at least a little bit more personality to separate him from all the other super nice do-gooders that make up his stock in trade. First of all, he's far from a wimp. I mean, look at him, he's freaking swole. Secondly, his enthusiasm for wanting to learn about the demis. Most of the male characters in shows like this generally don't have a whole lot of agency, or even worse, are sort of reactionary to the plot. They're just there. They don't really have huge stakes in what's happening beyond wanting to do right by all of the girls in their harem. Here though, even if he hadn't met any of these girls, he'd still be as enthusiastic and curious about demi-humans as he is now, which makes him feel more like an actual character, not a pair of pants that the audience treats as a surrogate. This is helped by the fact that he's very obviously not interested romantically in any of the girls. It's purely platonic relationships between a teacher and his students. Except for maybe Miss Himari, but that's debatable. We'll get to her. The three main students are Hikari, an enthusiastic vampire, Kyoko, a shy Dullahan, and Yuki, an even shyer snow woman. Each of them start coming to Tetsuo for their own reasons, particularly for help with issues or problems they're having at school or with themselves, and Tetsuo does his best to help solve these problems or give advice, and in exchange the girls give him interviews where he asks them for details about what it's like for them being demi-humans. Hikari is quote-unquote the main girl, the first one we meet. She's a slacking student, a bit of an airhead, and has way too much energy, and often lets her emotions get the best of her. She's loyal and friendly, but is a bit overwhelming for long periods of time, a bit of a problem when she's the main girl for most of the show's runtime. But I do find her entertaining, if nothing else. Kyoko is a pretty bland character. Not from a design standpoint, it's kind of hard not to find a person's design interesting when they have a giant blue flame coming out of their neck while carrying their head around in their arms. But when it comes to her actual character and personality, she's a bit of a shy and quiet girl, but confident enough to actually approach other people and maintain a conversation. She's also pretty darn boring. Unlike Hikari's boundless energy and quick wit, or Yuki's attempts at overcoming her own crippling shyness and self-esteem issues, Kyoko is pretty normal and simplistic. She generally doesn't have a whole lot to recommend her, and even her carrying around her head generally doesn't seem like that big of a barrier for her. And the one or two times when it does become an issue, the problem is solved with minor conversations, or a simple experiment with minimal or no drama. It's actually rather nice, but it doesn't really make her that compelling of a character. I actually wanted to like her more than I do, but she just isn't that interesting to me. Yuki, of course, is the wilting flower of the group. She has a lot of self-esteem issues and has a lot of problems with her demi-human abilities, as well as difficulty actually talking to people outside of her immediate friends. And so her interviews with Tetsuo also give her a chance to open up a little bit more. Her arcs and problems aren't anything different from any other shy girl in anime, but she does manage to be both cute and interesting without coming off as so much of a wallflower that you'd mistake her for a mural in the background. And then we have Himari, who I find to be the most interesting character of the show. She's a succubus that is trying her damnedest not to be sexy, which is immediately an interesting idea to me. As I mentioned before, her big problem is that her skin constantly secretes a powerful aphrodisiac, so coming into skin-on-skin contact with any male past puberty could lead to her unintentionally seducing them. She wears a tracksuit all the time in an effort to hide her body and cover as much of it as possible. She takes early trains to work and late trains home to avoid the crowds, and she always does her best to keep a distance from anyone, both emotionally and physically. It isn't until an accidental contact with Tetsuo leads her to believe that he's got a strong enough will to be immune to her secretions that she actively starts to crush on him, and at that point, she also becomes one of the funniest characters in the anime as well.
This is my turn for a hug!
Not a good idea.
Right, I forgot. What is wrong with me?
And those are our 5 main characters, who we follow throughout this little 12-episode romp of them dealing with demi-problems and teenage problems. The interactions between them are relatively simple and gentle and non-threatening, and the show itself is surprisingly down-to-earth and mellow, even with its more eccentric characters. Again, apart from the whole demi-human angle, this could just be another feel-good high school slice-of-life anime. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In terms of animation, well, it's not going to be winning any awards anytime soon, but it does go above and beyond the bare minimum required for a series like this, which I can appreciate. There's a lot of just sitting around and talking, as the interviews in the title would suggest, but when characters do move, the movements carry some good energy with them, particularly when Hikari is involved or Himari is being a doofus. The colors are pretty muted in the show as well. There's nothing that really jumps out at you save for important characters' clothing or hair, and that's something that doesn't even really apply to Tetsuo, who, aside from his taller look, is pretty generic looking, even as far as slice-of-life characters tend to go. But I think that the muted color palette works for the show, as again, it's meant to be more down-to-earth despite the fantastical gimmick it's saddled itself with. As for the overall designs of the characters, I find them quite nice. Again, more down to earth, and if there's anything I can praise the show for, it's the fact that holy shit, we have high school students who are actually proportioned like high school students for a change. The only female character in the cast who is made out at times to be out-and-out sexy is Himari, and even then the show is 50-50 with how it utilizes that, as she's almost never trying to make herself look sexy or sexual in any way. But she does have her moments, many of which are, of course, used for comedy. In terms of music, wait, there was music in this show? Yeah, sorry, but I watched the show twice over before doing this review, and I can't recall a single piece of background or incidental music for the entire show. Generally, I would say that at least they do a good job of enhancing a particular scene, but no, I think back on the series and try my hardest to think of any of the music, and I just come back with a great big blank. Not helping is the fact that a good chunk of the series actually has a sort of quietness to it, or the music itself is so soft and out of the way that it's basically non-existent. I actually kind of like this aspect of the series, as it puts more emphasis on letting the characters' interactions and dialogue speak for itself without the music overpowering them and telling us how to feel during particular moments. And it just makes the music all the more powerful when it is actually noticeable. The same with the sound effects, which are much more down-to-earth and blend in quite well. The most over-the-top ones I can recall is when Kyoko gets embarrassed.
Detail what the reaction was all about!
Not sure if that's meant to be a metaphor for something else. In terms of voice acting, I will say that everyone does a very good job, most of the time. Himari is fantastic, constantly being manic and goofy and constantly losing her cool. Tetsuo sounds quite ordinary, which is his character I suppose, but again, Kyoko kind of drops the ball here. Her boring personality is matched with an equally boring voice, to the point where she actually sounds quite monotone at times. I mean, Yuki, by all accounts, is supposed to be more shy than her, and yet she stands out a lot more with her higher-pitched, raspy whisper voice than Kyoko's completely toneless, gentle, monotone droning. And Hikari, well, she's a Genki girl through and through. Overall, the series lured me in on what I feel was a bit of a false pretense. I was expecting something closer to Jitsuwa Watashiwa or Rosario Vampire, but what I got was a much more down-to-earth slice-of-life story, something that's meant to make you feel good, smile, and relax, like Azumanga Daioh. It's not a bad show at all. In fact, I found myself enjoying it quite a bit, but for me, it's the sort of series I need to be in a particular mood to watch and fully enjoy, as I'm generally not the sort to sit through slower, high school slice-of-life stories unless there's some action to balance it out, or it's very heavy on humor. Interviews with Monster Girls has no real action, and the humor it has, while enjoyable, is, again, much more down-to-earth. If you're looking for something smooth and gentle that you can just pop in and relax to, well, this is a pretty good choice. And you don't have to worry about awkward scenes where a horse, snake, and bird woman try to rape someone while extra horny during a full moon. See you next time, everyone.